Hey, what's up, guys? I'm Brian. This is Tech Therapy. I am here with my partner in crime, Stop the FOMO. FOMO, the topic for today, or I should say, our tech therapy session for today is right after our LG Resurrection video. And the topic for today, or the subject of today's tech therapy, is Quantum.OLED from Samsung Display. Um, Setting the
Or
table for
or wait. Or why are they letting them die?
why, yes. So is it being beaten? No. We feel more like it's being put out to pasture or it's being very prematurely ended because to me, this is the largest jump in TV technology I have seen probably ever. FOMO. It was a drastic jump. And what we went to was CES, and we predicted, both of us, more so me, that we would see an 83-inch quantum dot OLED, the S95F and the S90F, and we thought Panasonic would choose Quantum.OLED for their new Z95B. And then Sony is still that quiet in the back, but we predicted obviously we'd see also a follow up to the very successful A95L. So FOMO, we saw that as the
Wait. Follow up to the 8, did the 895L have a follow up? It was just the 895L rolling
yeah, no,
over
we're gonna keep
year
it running.
after year
But I
after
think
year.
we assumed that the Quantum Dot OLED, for context, for those who don't know, the Value Electronics TV shootout, Quantum Dot OLED, not Sony, but that tech. Oh, Sony has one. What was the A95K, the A95L, the A95L? Did it win 3 years in a row?
Yes, that's
Sorry, so
why. So
A95L. But at the base technology, FOMO, the panel is a Quantum Dot OLED from Samsung Displays. So they're
Mhm.
really undefeated. I thought they were the future, and yet everyone is running towards this primary RGB tandem OLED that is the base of the G5. FOMO,
Mhm.
what do you think is happening with
Okay,
Samsung Display?
so it's very obvious looking back at what we saw at CES, and this is the story I'm seeing. And now, before you guys get mad or anything, the purpose of this video is to save QD-OLED, right?
Yes,
Just so you
yes.
guys know, we're
Save the
trying
whales.
to we're trying to convince Samsung, not Samsung Display. I know Samsung Display Chirag is very proud of this technology.
Yeah,
We're trying to convince the big boys at Samsung Electronics, and we have a solution. At the end, there is a solution how you can make money on QD-OLED, and we'll show it with you near the end. But so here's the story. At CES, Samsung says, hey, we have OLED TVs. They would never mention what kind of OLED it is, right? It's just OLED, right? 83-inch OLED. It's big. So they're focused on the big. And I'm thinking, wait, it's been 3 years now. You don't ever want to talk about QD OLED. And
yeah,
the big thing is, I think, generally speaking, they want to phase out OLED, period. Doesn't matter if it's QD OLED, doesn't matter if it's LG's
in
OLED.
general. Yep.
And replace it with a good enough LCD technology. And up to this point, it's like they haven't found that. QD OLED has been really impressive, and they're kind of stuck with that. But if RGB micro LED, which is very similar to Hisense RGB mini LED, it's not micro LED, it's an LCD display that feels like it can come close enough to OLED that
Yeah.
consumers will select it over OLED. If they can get consumers to select RGB micro LED, and I think consumers will because of the micro LED misnomer. Hearing micro LED, the consumer will go, wait, this must be better than OLED. Everyone says micro LED is better than OLED, and it's slightly larger than the smallest OLED, right? Let's say it starts at 75-inch, 4K RGB micro LED. We know that size is coming early next year or something like that. So Samsung has that easy transition to the quote unquote next generation after OLED. And why is it they want to get rid of OLED? There is no money in it. The margins are so slim. Doesn't matter who
Yeah.
you are, whether it's WOLED or it doesn't matter who the supplier is, WOLED, QD-OLED, they prefer to have the higher margins on an LCD RGB micro LED.
Yeah.
And so I see that trend. And they're moving to the art store, right?
Yep.
Well, OLED cannot do art store because they're branded.
Oh,
And so that's a second loss of revenue.
so
First,
yeah.
the margins. Now there's no subscription. And they're like, this is like a double dip of pain for us.
Yeah.
That's why I think they want to phase out OLED, but we have a reason for them to continue with QD OLED. Okay, Brian.
So let's go back in time. And I'm gonna put up a funny thumbnail here. When the S95B was introduced, There was
Yes.
very little fanfare. One, it was just dropped, and I did several videos on that fact. It literally just showed up. FOMO hits me up and is like, "Hey, what are you doing right now?" And I said, "Why? What's up?" He goes, "I'm gonna unbox this thing, and we're gonna get a live reaction." And we've done that in the last few years, but this FOMO, it was against the legendary A90J. At the time, the brightest OLED, the heat sink, the thing. So we did it on the
Hmm.
Spears and Muscle, and I'll never forget. My mouth was open, like jaw dropping difference. It was not only brighter, but the colors matched. It had more color, but it never looked inaccurate. So it had everything you would want. And I was like, this is the biggest difference we have seen since
Hmm.
OLED was
Wait,
introduced.
on YouTube, you were not
Yeah,
in my
yeah.
studio.
No,
You
no,
saw it
no.
through a live stream compression where you're going, oh my gosh, this is clearly a superior TV. You
Yeah,
saw
and
color luminance, color saturation hop off your screen.
yeah,
Yep.
and it changed the industry. It made LG, which LG has had micro lens array since QD-OLED was even introduced. They could have introduced this technology probably
But
2
they
or
didn't
3
have
years
to
ago.
because they're like, well, why do we need to? We're
Yeah,
kicking the butt of QLED.
and they had the market other than Sony's A1E and I think the U80. They had a couple OLEDs, but really they were just WOLEDs, and they were better at it. All of a sudden, there was this game changer. But what we noticed from at the time is that when the TV would shut off, the menu would just say OLED. There was no quantum dot. There was no quantum dot
Nothing.
writing in the literature.
Well,
And
and
then when I
on
would,
the website, there was no mention of quantum. It just said OLED, and you
yes,
had to
so
find it in a menu. It was a hidden menu on
yeah,
Samsung's own store. You had to
which
hunt it down.
yeah, which they put quantum dot on everything as soon as they introduced that technology. But the funny thing is, FOMO, the very next day, or probably a couple days later, I looked up on the website at Best Buy. They had them. I'm like, I
Mhm.
got to go see this for myself. And where I found it was next to the crystal displays, the cheaper section. And I was like, wow, this is the amazing athlete of the family that maybe is adopted, that is about to put the rest of the lineup to shame. And that year, FOMO, it really was not
Wait,
acknowledged much.
this is like when the Raiders benched Marcus Allen
Yeah,
and stuck him at the end of the bench.
yeah,
It doesn't
like
matter how
sorry.
good he was. Like, you know what?
Yeah,
We don't want you playing,
you're
and they
messing
benched
things.
him.
Yeah,
And
you're
then for
messing
five
things up.
years or whatever, he was at his peak, and they did not allow him to play. And this is
So,
exactly what has
so
happened.
yeah, and so why it makes complete sense, FOMO, was last year you and I were at Value Electronics. We had the S95D go against the G4. That was the big matchup. And we had the QN900D, the 8K Neo QLED flagship,
Bravia
$10,000.
9.
It
Hmm.
was off to the side. And you and I were going to do a competition between all three. And once we saw the S95D, we just shut off the QN900D.
Yeah,
And
it was just so good.
it was so good, but it dawned on us that not only was it that had better contrast, it had real quantum dot color, the real wider color gamut. But more importantly, FOMO, it was actually brighter
Yeah, I know that was the crazy part.
with the contrast. So my point is, if that is my best and I'm putting out my best, and here's the stepchild, instead of promoting that, I think they felt like, okay, this thing is, we have to continue to do it. And then we have our own theories on why they went with the anti glare. Because the
Hmm.
anti-glare for me is really about artwork and a matte finish
Hmm.
to have artwork displayed. It made
Hmm.
no sense to put that on the S95D at all.
Yeah, because there's no art being displayed. You don't want to be displaying art
On an OLED,
24/7.
no. So it seemed like they set it up in a way. Look, Samsung Display is amazing. Chirag, that team, they're brilliant. It's still the best technology I've ever seen. It's brighter. They add 1,000 nits per generation. It's more efficient. But what I saw from Samsung Display this year, FOMO, was a lot more implementation on phones and cars, less on TVs.
IT, yes. So small, or specifically for QD OLED, because small display you have RGB, direct view OLED, and
Yep.
they're true tandem RGB OLED. But for QD OLED, it's a very specific IT implementation, like 27 inches to maybe 40 something inches, right? That range
Yeah.
for gamers, and and they're still like hotcakes, right? Gamers love it. The problem is in the TV space, the margin isn't there. In the monitor space, the margin is, because
Yeah.
you look at the price. Wait, these monitors like around 1,000. Well, imagine a TV that's like 4 times the size and it's only $500 more.
Yeah.
that margin doesn't match up. That
Yeah.
because they're trying to compete on price with similarly performing TVs or similarly priced TVs, but they're not getting the margins to match it. If they really wanted those margins, they would have to price it so much higher than they are now. And we really don't know what the true price to Samsung Electronics is because they're a subsidiary, Samsung Display subsidiary of Samsung Electronics. So we
Yeah.
don't really know what the true price is. But if you look at Sony, how they're pricing the A95L,
Yeah.
it's barely dipped because that's how expensive it is to get the QD OLED. And so if LG's new RGB primary tandem is more cost effective for everyone, including Samsung's own TVs, they
Yeah.
go, you know what? If we stick with OLED, we might as well go with those guys, assuming
Yeah.
the pricing is that competitive. Which takes us to, well, then why didn't Sony and Panasonic choose QD-OLED if it's the better technology like we claim? Well, here's my theory, speculation.
Mhm.
When they called Samsung Electronics, they're like, well, or Samsung Display, they're like, well, it's possible it may not be out next year or the year after. And they're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. We're in this for the long term. If we're going to create software for this thing, we don't want to waste our time fine-tuning your next-gen panel only to have it disappear a year later. Whereas G4, they know, or rather LG Display, they know those guys are committed to OLED. They will live or die on OLED. Samsung Display, they got a lot of things happening. They don't need QD OLED to survive.
For
LG
TVs.
Display for TVs, because they have other options. LG Display needs WOLED to survive on TVs. And so in the long term, it's smart for Sony and Panasonic to say, well, we're unsure if they're going to go in there for the long term.
Yep.
Even if this is slightly worse, let's go with LG's primary RGB tandem OLED. And we're safe.
Yeah.
Slight drop in performance, maybe, but at least for the long term, not a waste of our time. And I think that's what happened rather than, oh, this new LG display is a superior
Better.
technology. Let's go with the
Yeah.
better, or it's cheaper.
Yep.
The better or the more important reason is it's going to be around for the next few years, so we don't waste time developing for a panel that we're going to have to redevelop when this panel just disappears and goes to pasture. And that's what we're trying to save QD OLED, but it's a hard sell to Samsung Electronics and Samsung Display.
Yeah.
And well, what are your thoughts on that? Because I think
Well
that's what happened. I
well,
don't
so
think it's a price or technology thing now.
well, FOMO for Samsung Electronics, we thought this was interesting was because they have a very interesting, with their QD or their Neo QLED mini LEDs, they have a very thought out. There's
Hmm.
their Q70, Q60, those aren't Neo QLEDs. But once you get into the 80, the 85, the 90, the 95, then you go into your 8K, which has two models this year too, FOMO. The QD OLED eradicated that lineup.
Right.
And when it got to where you and I would start to recommend last year, we both began to recommend the Q90D. Why? Well, it was the end of the year
Hmm.
and the TV was much cheaper, but at launch, it was more expensive than the S95D. So it
Yep.
was really cannibalizing their
Well,
own
well, actually,
lineups.
you've identified how big those margins are, right?
Yes.
You launch a
Yeah.
TV at 6 grand. By Black Friday, it's like barely four. I mean, there's
Yeah.
so much room, and there's
Yeah.
still more room. They're still making money on 4,000 on a quote unquote 8K because it's an LCD TV. Now,
Yes.
8K OLED would stay that high, as you see with
Yeah.
LG.
Or the Z
Hardly any
series.
movement. Right.
Yeah. Well, and the
So
90.
it makes
Yeah.
sense. Yeah.
Well, and I think the limited with the mother glass and the sizes, I mean, you're able to
Mhm.
do with some of these QN90, we've had 42, 48, 50, 55, 65, 70. There
Last
has to be
year, 98 inch last
98.
year. Hmm.
Yeah, and I think when we talked about the 83 inch was really got us thinking about this was if they do decide to go for that, when they're already knowing the industry has completely changed on a dime to where mini LED is the future. It's just not there's no denying it now. It's price, it's margins, but FOMO, the size has no limit.
There you go. You just nailed it. It's not so much mini LED is the future. Size is the future. So there
Sizes.
were a,
Yeah,
a lot of skeptics, 98 inches, but these skeptics don't live in the US. More importantly, they don't live in Texas or Utah or Colorado, where people
yeah,
have large enough living rooms to fit a 100-inch TV. No problem. It's just, oh, I don't want to spend 30,000 on a TV. Okay, what about 1400 from Costco? What? 1400 98 inch? I'm there. And
Yeah.
Samsung is the best at that kind of market research. They saw it. They're like, okay, wait, how do we play with this narrative? We need to sell larger TVs. We need to have the art store available, and OLED is out of the picture. It can neither get large nor can it hold art 24/7.
Yep.
Boom. We got to find a way to
Yep.
bring LCD back, and the RGB micro LED saved them. Now, I'm not saying it'll be cheap this year, nor am I saying it's cheap next year, but there's an inflection point. At the point where RGB micro LED per inch hits that similar price point as OLED, goodbye OLED.
Yeah.
And
Well, and
you know,
yeah.
and the Chinese are making it, not Samsung.
Yeah.
Whether it's Hisense or someone in China similar to Hisense, they're so good at scaling up price, right? It's going to happen.
Well, and then FOMO, the artwork thing, I thought about this more. It wasn't just the frame now being mini LED.
Mhm,
That's aside from that. There was an 8K Neo QLED frame there.
mhm.
But it was beautiful. When you walk into a
Or wait,
home,
wait. It's an 8K Neo QLED. I mean, it's an 8K. They added the matte, so
yep,
now it can display art, but it's not the frame, so you can't add frame around it.
yeah, but it had this look to it. But if
Yeah.
you really think about it, and I think those of us in the comments now as enthusiasts, we really do still have a dedicated home theater, or we have our TVs are in a separate room. But if you look at
Mhm,
people with very high-end large homes, they decorate them. Even if you have a study, FOMO, a TV maybe used to fit in a credenza or a cabinet, but
that
now
you
that these
can
size
wait, wait, you
you
can
can close.
close.
Yeah, but now that these TVs are now 75, 85, the TV in the end is still just a big piece of metal or plastic that my wife doesn't love. Your wife likes, short throw projectors because the screen goes away.
Yep.
But when you see these art pieces with the frames and the matte finish, you really could put it there, and if it's
Mhm.
sitting there, it does look like a painting.
Yep. And
And
remember, it's not limited to art. You can display the weather. Basically, Samsung has a whole system of 24/7 displays
yeah,
and now they have generative art where you say, hey, I like sunshine on the beach in the
yeah,
coast of
you
Italy.
can change
And
it.
they'll start generating stuff that looks like that, right?
Yeah,
Or I want it to be a little bit cooler and it's high resolution. And these 8K, it's going to be 8K native resolution. It's not hard. So they see that as 3 or 4 years from now. And guess who makes the decision to buy these things if you want to pay a little extra? The significant other. Like, are you sure you want to pay that much for a TV that looks better, but I don't see the difference? Versus, oh, that's beautiful. It makes our home beautiful. Buy
yeah.
it.
Well, we've always said, with anyone that says, "I have the frame," they kinda look at you like, "I have a
Yeah.
frame." My friends say that, I'm like, "That's your wife's TV or your spouse's TV."
The
But
head
FOMO,
drops.
so why we're summarizing it this way, and Samsung is the best at this, because if you look at the Hisense 116 UX
Hmm.
RGB mini LED,
Hmm.
beautiful looking TV,
Very.
all kinds of demo material. But when you look at the Samsung RGB micro LED, they're the same technology, but the design of that TV blows
Oh,
away the Hisense.
yes.
And
The
that's what
back.
Samsung is amazing
Yes.
at.
Hmm.
So if you look at back quickly to the 900 series, their wireless one connect box, all their technology, all this sleek beauty, the QD OLED is literally taking that TV out at the knees from them. It
Yeah.
really is.
Every time, so let me tell the consumers this. Every time you guys buy S95D or this year S95F, Samsung executives like, no, not another
Yes.
sale,
Yeah.
because they were hoping you'd get a similarly priced QN95D or
Yeah.
I guess this year's QN900F, even on sale. They'd rather you get that 8K TV because now you can start watching art store stuff. I mean, they
Yep.
got you hooked. They have this whole thing happening, this whole
Yeah.
ecosystem that the S95F completely circumvents. And
Yeah.
so for those of you that say, oh, Samsung's abandoning OLED, they're trying to stay in business, honestly, because you can't have it both ways. You can't fight the very aggressive Hisense and TCL pricing, size, features, but then charge a lot and it just, you have to choose your poison. And they've decided that lifestyle, good enough image quality is going to
Yeah.
win the day. And,
Well,
and
because
that's
then
where we are
FOMO
right now.
well, then FOMO lifestyle goes into their smart home features. It goes into that entire ecosystem, the
Yeah.
lights, the blinds. But FOMO quickly too. we think that they went after OLED in the first place. A lot of Samsung's marketing was about burn-in, if you remember those videos. Remember those commercials?
QLED,
Like, "Hey, you can leave it on
yes,
all day." So I feel like they did OLED just to block at the time, their biggest competitor was LG. LG had the market dominated. So they
yes,
did that, but I think what they ended up doing is they ended up neutralizing LG, but at the same time, neutralize their own lineups. Their bread and butter was always that 80 series, the 85.
yeah,
But it's hard. So when people look at us, FOMO, and they say, well, Bry, we did this with the QN90 last year and the year before. FOMO, should I buy that? Very rarely could you say yes. There was really no reason to choose the QN85 or the 90 or the 95 over a Quantum Dot OLED. And if you were a
hmm
gamer, FOMO, the gaming mixture of instantaneous pixel response, all of the extra color, the contrast ratio, the screen uniformity, it really is a perfect technology. It's as close to perfect as I've seen in TVs. So you're not dealing with a lot of those
hmm
issues.
right.
You're
I, I
cannibalizing your own lineup.
I think this. I mean, you basically just segued into the solution how we save QD OLED,
Yeah.
which is create a dedicated gaming TV that is QD OLED. Strip out all the stuff that makes the TV expensive because the reason why the S95D is expensive, you got the One Connect box.
Yep.
Gamers don't care about that.
No.
They're just latency, right?
It's a point
You
of
have the
failure anyway. Yeah.
nice, right, and you have a nice casing. Forget that, like S90D casing, right? Just the cheapest casing you can manage.
Mhm.
I
Yep.
just want the QD-OLED technology and a good gaming processor. I don't need the latest AI. Like strip all of that out of it.
Yep.
Anything to save money. I don't need HDR 10 plus. Whatever it is that you can save money
Yeah.
on this TV, where it's like the frame. The frame is a basic TV that shows art. Give me a QD OLED unleashed. So, just unleash it, right? Uh, because we don't care about image quality the way cinema artists do, right? This is all about gaming performance, just enough settings so we could tune it to taste with HGIG
Yeah.
and, filmmaker, that's fine, just basic. But if you can
Yeah.
strip it down, and even audio, at this point, you don't care about audio anyway, so don't even worry about
Yeah.
fancy audio, anything. If you can do that and add some margin back in, and then sell it in the sizes that gamers want. That's another thing, as we understand. It may never come in at 83 because there might not be enough gamers with that much money, but at least this will preserve QD OLED as a technology. But the issue is now you're limited to only Samsung Electronics selling it
Yeah.
if you don't promise that this will be a long-term commitment on your part. Because your third-party buyers, they're like, well, we want a longer-term commitment
Yeah.
from you, Samsung Display, if you're going to make this the thing. So hopefully, if you go in that direction, it becomes the de facto gaming panel, right?
Yep.
So, I mean, that's one angle. Otherwise, I don't see QD OLED lasting without some angle that gives Samsung Electronics a chance to make money on this technology.
Well, and FOMO, if you look back at the A95L, the biggest talk on it was the 77-inch. Is it Gen 2 or is it Gen 3?
Yeah.
And they're only gonna make so many. I think that's where someone like Sony probably would have been fine using the Evo panel from LG for 2 years, where I think Samsung only made a finite amount of those. So maybe Sony ran into that problem and said, "Look, I can't sell the A95L Gen 3. I can't tell anybody it's a Gen 3." Maybe they had to throttle it. Do you see what I'm saying? Maybe that
Yeah.
caused an
Yeah.
issue for them where they weren't able to meet the demand and said, "Wow, we're gonna be in a real
hmm
problem. If I wanna do a Z9 series where I have 2 years, I'm not gonna have enough panels."
That's
Because
a
if
good
people,
point.
yeah, so I thought that's maybe where it started because people had said, what's funny is even in the chat of our G series or our LG video, people were saying, do they have enough stock to roll this over? Sony's,
hmm
I think, now in this position too, where they're saying, okay, look, we're going to replace the TV. The X90 lasted 2 years. This TV lasted 2 years. Where Samsung has too many models and too many offerings. And I
Yeah.
do feel like the QD OLED is so good. And back to the gaming thing, FOMO, I think people that don't understand gaming realize that no matter how good a mini LED is, for latency, for those purposes, you're going to lose some of that local dimming. The contrast ratio, I don't
hmm
care if it's RGB, tandem, whatever. OLED allows that contrast ratio to stay intact because you're not worrying about a backlight and
You
there's
know,
no blur.
speaking on this topic of gaming, Now that I think about it, though, Samsung's hitting against the new RGB tandem primary OLED. It performs good enough, and it starts entering those sizes aggressively. Because right now it's not in those 27, 32-inch sizes yet. But
Quantum.OLED or the tandem?
tandem, the
Yeah, see,
primary,
yeah.
RGB primary, right?
But
But
Quantum.OLED is at those
quantum
sizes.
dot OLED is. But what I'm saying is, well, I mean, maybe Samsung is going to have a problem in terms of selling those monitors if you have the G5 panel on a 32-inch 4K, on a
Yeah,
27-inch, right? I mean,
yeah.
as a gamer, what would you buy? Because they're so close in performance now.
And that's it.
We're
Yeah.
going to assume that. We don't know yet, but let's say they're within 5%.
Yeah, and so for you gamers in the chat right now too, or in our account, we do premiere these videos live. So love you guys in the comments that watch these with us. As a gamer, to me, Samsung and LG are tied. The game optimizer versus the game bar for Samsung. Samsung has more presets. Dolby Vision gaming versus HDR 10 plus gaming phone. We know that's a wash. HGIG versus Samsung's. They have their own
Base,
version of it.
what they call it basic, but if you read the sub menu, it says HGIG. But
Yeah, yeah,
apparently, apparently LG is more accurate. But I find them close enough.
and I like the Samsung one because it's still very poppy.
Hmm.
So I love the Samsung one because its flexibility of image is off the charts. You can make it look however you want. I was willing to go with Samsung this year because I like their game bar. I like the Game Motion Plus is a game
I
changer. That's
do.
the thing we have to talk about too, FOMO. Because Game Motion Plus is excellent on a mini LED. It's phenomenal on an OLED.
Hmm.
So that's what I was excited about trying, and the screen uniformity of Quantum.OLED versus WOLEDs. They do struggle with screen uniformity. It's noticeable on gaming more than any other content. So I think FOMO, there's some truth to all of it. I think maybe LG Display is able to cut a deal to Panasonic to keep them, and with Sony maybe to keep them. There might be an availability aspect from Samsung Electronics saying, "Hey, look, we're not
Hmm.
going to continue to invest in this." I think it's somewhere in the middle. I feel like it's being murdered, though. I do feel like
Yeah.
it's being put out, and seeing that it's better generationally. FOMO. We look at some of these, like the G5, it's 30% brighter than the B4,
Hmm.
right? That's where they go. Samsung Display is like, oh no, ours is 1,000 nits brighter than our last one, which was last year. They're making massive jumps, and the efficiency is there. We also saw their implementation for scopes on rifles. We saw them on helicopter helmets. So they have their
Yeah.
implementation is everywhere. So I'm not worried about them, but I do feel like we're saying goodbye to the best jump that I've seen in TV technology since I've been involved
Right.
in it.
Yeah. And so for those of you who saying, well, QD-OLED is not going to die. QD-OLED is not going to die, as Brian said. It'll be implemented elsewhere, but on TVs. And
Yeah.
here's my challenge to consumers who right now are in the QD-OLED camp. If you walk into a store and you see RGB micro LED at the 85-inch size, and I'm telling you, it looks really good.
Yes, it does.
It's hard. I mean, QD-OLED has that infinite contrast, all of that, but there is this performance, brightness, contrast impact that this RGB mini LED slash micro LED from Samsung, same thing. I think this is going to be the TV that brings Samsung back into the lead because they have quote unquote the superior technology, because this one is much better than QLED. QLED was a lot of confusion. What's QLED? And a lot of
Yeah.
consumers are like, is QLED better because Q comes after O? I mean, it was ridiculous. But with
Yeah.
micro LED, they are tapping into our subconscious. Oh, micro LED, it must be good. So literally, the number of enthusiasts who know the truth that the RGB micro LED is really an LCD TV using something like Hisense's RGB mini LED, although it does look better, it is not true micro LED, doesn't matter, right? Consumers see micro LED in the label, and this is something that Samsung is going to push hard. It's going to work. Consumers will find that, oh, I can afford this micro LED. I don't have to pay 80,000. I'm paying only 8,000. What kind of margin is that on an
Yeah.
LCD TV? That's 4K, right?
Yeah.
And they're going to sell a bunch of these. And as an enthusiast, I think you guys will be impressed. Now, gaming is a different enthusiast. I'm saying for those of you who are just watching regular content, this is the bomb.
Well, and for gamers, let's be honest, if you're a monitor person, which a lot of gamers are desktop still, you're happy because you do have the monitors. And we talked to Shirag about the fact that a lot of these QD OLED monitors aren't as bright. That's by design. They don't think that you need 4,000 nits on a desktop as far as you and I are sitting from the camera. So I never thought
I
about it that way.
well,
I
I don't
still
want to
want it.
sit.
I
I
want it.
don't want to sit 24 inches away from 4,000 nits.
Yeah, yeah,
Can you?
exactly.
I mean, okay, maybe a tiny specular highlight, but it's like I have all RGB OLED monitors. They're inkjet printed, right? Very similar to that stuff that CSOT is showing off. They peak at 600 nits, and it's more than bright enough for me. I mean, it's
Yeah,
beautiful. I love them,
yeah,
but
yeah,
I never said to myself, you know what? If only I had 3,000 nits.
yeah,
I mean, infinite contrast, RGB
yeah.
direct OLED, perfect. I love them, and that's what's going to be like when the TV enthusiast sees RGB micro LED. There will be no inquiry about, if only the contrast is better. Because you and I, when we see an LCD TV, we're like, yeah, we can see the contrast
Yeah.
suffers here or this suffers there. But we're getting so close now with RGB micro LED, or
Well,
I keep on calling
so
it micro
and
LED, just RGB mini LED.
many other yeah, but see,
This
before
could
but
be
see
that bridge. It's the bridge that
well, see,
crosses
and
over.
FOMO and that's why quantum dot OLED was such a great leap. It wasn't just that it was brighter, it had more color, and it was tangible. With a mini LED, going from LED to mini LED, we thought, "Oh, that's gonna be the big change, big game changer." It really wasn't. It didn't really create better local dimming at all. It
Mhm.
really looked very much the same as full array. So you weren't like, "Well, this mini I have many more zones." Yeah, you had many more little zones, but it didn't really give you the difference and, "Oh my god, this is the big game changer." And then we saw something like the Bravia 9 FOMO, which had excellent local dimming, but it wasn't as bright. It's still kind of the same brightness as a
The
G4 or
the
an
QM8
OLED.
was brighter.
The
Last year's
QM8 was
QM8.
brighter.
If you went pixel to pixel on a vivid mode, the QM8 was way brighter. But that
Yep.
wasn't what Bravia 9 promised to be the brightest TV. But
Just
you're
a
right.
great it was about
Yeah.
realizing 4,000 nit content. But if you look at these RGB, because the backlight is about color,
Hmm.
you can push that brightness to 10,000 nits, and the brightness is not gonna lose the color. That's the key that makes it look more like OLED FOMO than
Right.
more zones and brighter. Because if you look at mini LEDs, they were
Yes.
always gonna be
Yes.
more zones and brighter. Now the backlight is color-based. That's what OLED is so good at, is turning off the color and make the colors vivid and be completely black. They're doing that with these backlights. That's what I think is really
Yes.
signaling the end of QD OLED, not the tandem OLED,
Hmm.
but actually the other technology, which is the RGB mini LED, I think is what's really killing it.
You just brought up a point that's technical in terms of perceptual vision, meaning the RGB mini LED technology that both Samsung and Hisense and even TCL showed off, right?
Yep.
As you get brighter, so you said 10,000 nits, if you could hit color luminances really bright, then it doesn't matter that you have a little bit of blooming on the lowest end. Do you know why? Because the screen is so bright on the high end, the blooming disappears. Because
Yeah.
your eyes shift between the rods and the cones. In bright light, your sensitivity to shadow detail disappears. Everything is crushed in your
It's like
eyes.
staring at the sun and looking down.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's exactly how they're going to solve for a little bit of blooming. I'm not going to say it disappears, but when it gets bright enough, perceptually, it's gone. You stick a camera on there, yes, the special meter will see the blooming,
Yeah.
but your eyes will no longer see it above a certain nit level. And I think that's how they're going to solve it rather than actually eliminating blooming, right? They're just going to make it brighter and you will not see the blooming, which is effectively the same thing. The
Yeah.
only problem is movies that are graded at 1,000 nits, it has to be tone mapped up. So you know how when we talk about tone mapping down, it's too bright for the TV. They're going to bring the colors down and compress it to what the TV could handle. Now we're
Yeah.
going the other way. It was originally graded at under 1,000 nits. We're going to have it to expand the color so that it hits 10,000 nits, and then your eyes will see it as if it was graded at 1,000, but they're going to take full advantage of the brightness. It'll be reverse tone mapping. And they're probably working on it now, and it was not possible in the past because AI computing, the power wasn't there. Well, it's there now. I think within a
Yep.
few years, we'll reverse tone map the other way, and now they don't even have to worry about tone mapping or blooming because you won't see it. It's just dark scenes, you won't see it because it's a dark scene. And bright. I mean, there's going to be some transition areas where you may see it, but that's those few movies where the RGB mini LED will fall apart. That if it's only 5 movies or so, then it
Yep.
doesn't matter because everything else is going to be bam, bam. Oh
Yeah.
my God.
Well, and FOMO, back to the original problem, is with the size.
Yes. And you want a
Blooming is not.
98-inch TV?
Yeah, but when you're even an 85-inch, when you're immersed that way, you're not so worried about the black bars
Mm-mm.
as you are when
Hmm.
you're back from a 65-inch. So
True.
also what's different too, FOMO, is that when Samsung started doing 98 or 100-inch TVs, that was with their flagship,
Hmm.
QN90A, QN90B.
Hmm.
Sony went the opposite way. It was the X92, it was the X90, and then
Hmm.
you had LG with their QNEDs. TCL and Hisense have their own way. Samsung is different this year. They're offering different tiers. So
Yeah.
they can go expensive with the 115. They can also do a Q8 and a Q7 of that. So that's where those margins, so they can say, FOMO, you know what, we are going cheaper here, but those margins must be amazing. Now, FOMO, I don't know if you
Hmm.
can share this. You don't have to do any names, but there was some news that you had heard about market share for OLED. You don't have to give the specific places where you heard it, but or that it was predicted their QD-OLED might leave sooner than we think.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, it was posted on Twitter.
Okay.
So on Twitter, they said that Bob O'Brien of DSCC, I think, predicted that QD-OLED will be gone next year. It's a
Next
prediction,
year.
guys.
Yeah, yeah.
Next year. And of course, I jumped on the Twitter feed, and if you look at my response, then you'll find the actual link. I said, "Wow, I predicted 2 years. He's saying next year, so it's not
Yeah,
even 1 year." So I thought I was going out on a limb, even touching on QD-OLED being gone, but he's even more certain it won't even be available next year for TVs, right? We're not talking about monitors. So
yeah,
you monitor enthusiasts, don't worry about it. But for TV owners who are looking at a 65, 77-inch next year, well, it's just like MLA. Who would have predicted
yeah.
last year that MLA would be gone? Now, doesn't mean it
Yeah.
won't come back, but
Yeah, yeah,
MLA is gone this year.
but wait, that's what made you and I, so those 2 pieces of information. Number 1, I met him last year, and I was shocked at what the percentage of OLEDs are sold. Even at their peak, they
Hmm.
were never making money. If anyone else, whether it's Sony or Samsung, wanna take part in it. And then if you talk about, the way you had just said it was, where's the money to be made if we continue this way? But what you just said about MLA too, someone said, "Well, why can't Panasonic just keep doing MLA?" It's not available.
Nope.
That's what made us think that maybe Samsung Electronics is doing the same thing to QD OLED. Saying, "Hey, look, guys, it's one of our companies. Maybe we're just forbidding them from doing this further. We're
Yeah.
gonna ride this out for another year." So that's what made me think was what he said, MLA ending so abruptly.
Hmm.
I'm sure Panasonic would have still loved to have MLA on top of it. They're not letting it happen because it's not effective cost-wise. And I
Yep.
wonder if that's the same thing from Samsung Electronics.
Absolutely, because let's talk about macroeconomics. If the OLED pie has not been growing, its peak was during the pandemic COVID era, right? And
Yeah,
so from that point, it was steadily shrinking, shrinking. And then this year, it jumped a little bit, but it never recovered to anywhere close to 2021/2022, right? It's been shrinking ever since. But mini LED has found, or LCD TVs have found new life with better technology, wide viewing angle, brighter, size. Wide viewing angle is the exclusive domain of OLED. Well, they're getting closer. Brightness, well, that's always been the strength of mini LED. And size is the exclusive domain of mini LED in terms of
yeah,
price to performance ratio. And OLED is going to see that shrink. And everyone in the industry believes that OLED cannot compete with this constant pricing pressure because OLED's image quality, we know how good it is, right? But there's only so much it could do. It's not micro LED. It is not the
yeah,
holy grail.
yeah,
And people can still say, well, there's a little risk of burn, which I think is no longer an issue, but some people still say that. But mini LEDs, if it looks so close, and forget micro LED, RGB mini LED, forget any of that. People who walk into Best Buy and Costco and they see a QM7, which is kind of like an entry level mini LED. They're like, oh, I'll take this.
Yeah,
They couldn't
yeah.
even tell the difference. I'm
Well,
like,
well, and
wow, because
well,
on
and
angle, it's like, wow.
so FOMO, we can just come up with this too. I just did this on the fly because this is how you and I talk. The problem with OLED is even the B series or the Sharp OLEDs look amazing. They actually don't need to upgrade them.
Mm-mm.
Since we've had HDMI 2.1 since the C9, there's really been no reason. They still look good enough. So here's the conundrum. You're only upgrading because of size.
Yes.
Okay. But they're limited in size. So if you had a 65-inch C9, unless you're jumping to 77, you can't go 77, 85. Not you're really only stuck to two steps. So I think that's the problem. They look good enough. If my C1 still looks great, if I had a mini LED from the C1 era, I would feel very outdated. So
Yeah.
their best thing is their biggest problem. And FOMO, talk about this. They're not cheaper to make than they were, but they're much cheaper to buy.
That's,
I mean, they're
yeah. Yeah.
literally an eighth of the price. So FOMO, really quickly, if you think about it, they're stuck in this spot where there's still a high fail rate, there's still a delicate technology, and they only can charge. Look at the G series. Let's just say this: the A89, A90J at 83, I think, was $8,000. The 83-inch G4 was six. Think about that for a second. 6 grand, and you guys were like, that's too expensive. The A90J is only 2 years older, and nobody blinked that it was $8,000. So
Hmm.
now that you see TCL and these TVs that are eight, like look, and Bravia 9 was $4,000 at 85 inches. So the margins, as you've point out, they're only getting worse and worse and worse. So I think
On
it
the
has to
OLED.
go for that reason in
Yeah.
general. And LG's keeping
Well,
us, it's the only show in town.
right. So Samsung has options, right? Samsung is very much like Sony in many ways now. They don't make their own LCD panels. They don't make their own mini LED. They source it, although they provide their own processor and chips and all that good stuff. But the panel itself, they no longer manufacture LCD panels. So they're sourcing it and adding their little magic sauce, very similar to what Sony does. But they're looking at the margins. They're looking at how much it costs to source from themselves QD-OLED that they actually make
Yeah.
versus, but then, BOE, TCL, whoever is supplying this next generation of LCD TV stacks of mini LED, RGB mini LED, all that stuff. Like, wait, even this entire stack, I'm making more money than with QD OLED or with LG's OLED, WOLED. I'm just going to go with what makes me money. And at the end, if what makes them money, the image quality, I always say, if it's good enough, you've won. And the question is, how good is good enough? And I think we're all there. It's not just Samsung. Sony, Samsung, Panasonic, we're all good enough. It's that last, I'd say 3 or 4% where you lose or win a shootout. That's the $2,000 bill you're paying, right? Skin tones. You don't want to pay for a calibrator. You want all the fine details out of the box. That's that $2,000. But if you just want a basic TV, why not get a $500 TCL? You'll be thrilled. And we're there. And so that's why I think it's great for consumers, not so good for advanced technology like QD OLED or OLED even.
Now, FOMO, do you think that there's always been some truth to competition within divisions or even within companies? Um, where like LG Display and LG Electronics. Obviously, LG Display, they need each other. I know there's some competition there. I do wonder with Samsung Electronics that they have these many divisions of TVs, 8K, all this, the design, all the beautiful tooling that goes involved versus QD OLED. I do wonder if there is some truth to competition from your own subsidiary hurts.
So
There's got to be some of
how
that, I think.
how Samsung is set up is Visual Display handles consumer TVs. So Visual Display is a division within Samsung Electronics, but it's not as clear cut a division as Samsung Display.
Just
This
yeah.
is a very clear division where they handle R&D and do the manufacturing. So they've been pushing for Samsung Electronics to promote QD OLED because they're engineering minded, right? They're focused on image quality and pushing the boundaries of performance. Visual Display is focused on only one thing:
Yep.
market share, making money. And if
Yes.
they, if their best executives, accountants, MBA grads cannot make a case that this will make them money, They're like, what do you want us to do? This is skunk works. I mean, skunk works are great, but if it doesn't make money, we're going to put it in a corner, like Xerox, right? Xerox had an amazing skunk works that ended up in a corner. Like they invented the mouse. They didn't know what to do with it in the corner. Now Steve
Yeah.
Jobs found
Didn't
it
Code
and
didn't
brought it
Kodak
back
do
out again.
but didn't Kodak do, like, the digital camera?
Right, right. And they
And they're
go
like,
through,
"Ah,
what
no,
do
no,
we,
was it
yeah,
Kodak?"
right.
But yeah,
Uh,
but you say there,
so
FOMO, think
that's
about it.
the problem. You
But
have
if you
to
s
be able to make a use
yeah,
case to make money for it.
and I bet you in a way, FOMO, they're saying to themselves, "I'm okay if we're getting beaten by Sony in this category, or TCL's eating our lunch on this side, Hisense, but if it's my own family member chipping into my profit margin, I think that's the greater issue.
Hmm.
If it's my only family member, and it's not like I think QD-OLED, if it had come out back when OLEDs were 15 grand, that would have been different, right?
Yeah,
It would just say, "This is our elite OLED lineup," kinda like you're seeing with, TCL with this X11. It's an
yeah.
enthusiast TV, it's separate. So I think for our recommendation for QD-OLED is offering a non-smart display only. Forget about kinda like what Panasonic did a few years ago where they had no tuner, there's nothing in it to make it a TV. It's basically a display, strip Tizen down to nothing, and just make it a use the technology for what it is. That's our idea of
Right.
saving it. I know it's not gonna work,
Right.
but I
Or actually, you actually brought up a different point. On the flip side, go extreme the other way, completely ad driven. The worst ads, like mandatory ads. Why? If this is the only way to save QD OLED, so let me actually, this is for you guys because you're the consumer. If you say to Samsung, okay, Samsung, for QD OLED, go crazy. I want ads everywhere so you can continue to make QD OLED because it's either that
it
or it
pays for it.
dies,
Yeah, yeah.
but it pays for itself. So if you say, look, I'll keep it connected to the internet forever
I
and you
promise.
can run all the ads you want, I promise,
Yeah,
but in return, make this TV. If they can make that a business case, there's a possibility. Because otherwise, how
yeah,
do you sustain a technology that doesn't make enough money? And you have to find a subscription model, an ad model, right? So you guys
yeah,
help us with that. I mean, but yeah, if you go to town with ads, right? Yeah, like it's like blaring audio ads. You have to listen to,
yeah,
hey, go buy
yeah,
these shoes, right? I mean, audio ads, visual ads, go to
yeah,
town. Please just keep QD
yeah,
OLED.
and
And if
and
you're willing to do that, they'll keep it. But I don't think you guys are. That's the
no,
problem.
and I'm not, and I don't care because, and people say this, "Hey, how are the smart features?" I literally everything I like Apple TVs on all these TVs, Fire TVs, I have
Hmm.
everything, all my everything's HDMI anyway. But FOMO, I do think that the reality is that it's gonna fade out, we think sooner than later, which quickly, um, back wrapping this up altogether was we thought 2 years ago that mini LED was gonna be a cheap, large, lower end option going forward. We never
Hmm.
dreamed that these TVs were gonna because we had the A95K, QD OLED was about to dominate, but we bumped into that guy, I was like, "Wow, the outside enthusiast thinks things are one way, the bean counters and the people that count the money, it's almost always the opposite, 100%."
Yeah. And the big surprise is how much money the frame makes.
Yeah,
That is not the obvious. The obvious is okay, good enough image quality, cheap TV, big size, people buy it. But what about selling art that's continuous?
yeah,
That is a completely new genre of TV sales. I mean, they're partnered with Ashley furniture stores.
yeah,
Genius,
yeah, I mean, they
right?
and
So
yeah, and
that's
FOMO, they
something that I
yeah.
have to clap. Samsung's done a great job with that.
Well, in FOMO, we also look at, Hisense has a model of it, TCL has one in stores. But I think too, what's interesting about the art, and I was playing with the Panasonic Z series and their art, and the AI art is cool. You literally save it, and it's in your folder. LG had that as well, but what I think is interesting is the frame looked kinda cheesy when it first came out. It's like a boxy TV. Well, they look elegant now.
Mhm,
But their weakness was they were not great TVs as far as image quality. Well, the mini LED version looks very good, FOMO.
mhm,
So
mhm,
the fact that you're seeing that anti-glare on all their TVs, guys, it's not because, and I'll finish with this, it's not because they're saying screw you guys. It's because their directive is what looks good in your room. What looks
mhm,
good with this image? Forget about the TV off, the glossy screen I like. FOMO, you get to clean your TV. If it can be a piece of art, or like you're saying, now it's
Yep.
like your TV behind you, it's a display. People are all about paying for that, and Samsung's about making money, and there's no money in QD-OLED.
Yep, I agree. I think that's kind of what inspired my video about Samsung. This is how they beat the Chinese, Hisense, and TCL, is creative, fitting into people's lifestyle in a creative way where people don't mind paying for art or whatever, right?
Yeah,
That is the hardest part. The hardest part about solving this is how do you get people to pay you more and be happy paying you, right? And Samsung, I think they figured out a formula, and I approve. I want them to be around, and if this is what it
yeah,
takes for them to be around and compete,
yeah.
so be it.
Well, and in closing, FOMO, it's QD-OLED, whether it's around for longer or not. It really pushed LG to the brink to bring out
Yes.
their best.
Hmm.
Otherwise, you would have seen CX, C10. It would have just continued the same, like you're saying with the C series. It makes them innovate. And even with their mini LEDs from Samsung, it's pushing them to innovate. So we need as much competition as possible. And we don't really have any real answers, but I think it's the best.
Ads, ads.
Yeah, I think it's the best technology. FOMO. Um, thanks, brother. Thanks for being here. I'm Brian. This is Tech Therapy. Those of you that watch these premieres live, we love you guys. We love chatting with you guys. But these are therapy. This therapy is for all of us, but it's namely for me and FOMO because we want to
We're
see it
QD
succeed.
OLED fans, and we want it to survive and
Absolutely.
save the QD OLED. We should have T-shirts, save QD OLED. That
Yeah, green peace. All right,
right.
guys. I'm Brian. This is Tech Therapy. This is Stop the FOMO. We'll see you in the next session. Take care.
Bye.
It's better to burn out than to fade away. There can be only one.